It's a great pleasure to welcome today Masja Zandbergen. Masja is Head of ESG Integration at Robeco, and she's put together some fascinating thoughts on 4 things that we think we know about ESG and investment in the COVID-19 pandemic, but do we really know them? There are lots of things that are flying around, statements that people are making that they think that the economy and society will develop in certain ways, but a lot of sort of reflection on what that actually means. It's great to have Masja here today to open the Responsible Investor Digital Festival and to kick us off with our opening keynote. Masja, welcome, and over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Hugh, for that nice introduction. Never let a good crisis go to waste. That is a quote from Churchill that was sometimes, I think, literally, but also maybe implicitly used or misused by the financial sector in this crisis. And I have to say also by me. Because haven't sustainable funds outperformed? Doesn't this crisis show that it's not only climate, but it's also social issues that are very relevant? And don't we see that managements are really not aligned with the broader stakeholders? And of course, the silver lining, sustainable trends are sped up by this crisis. Well, I think first and foremost, this crisis is a health crisis. Many people either getting seriously ill or losing loved ones, for which I feel very sorry. And it's not over yet, as we've seen the last 2 weeks, actually a rise in numbers again. So by all means, this is not a good crisis. This is really a bad one. And I wanted to acknowledge that before we go further into the different topics. Now, done that, let's talk about these 4 things that I mentioned. We thought we knew about the pandemic and ESG investing. And let's investigate a little bit further. The first one, sustainable strategies have outperformed. That's definitely the case. In general, we see that ETFs and active funds have outperformed during the downturn, but also year to date. And the question then is why? And we have researched this based on 2 different data providers. And our conclusion is that it's mostly a product or sector-related effect. And we find that if we correct for size and sector bias, that there is no significant outperformance of operationally oriented ESG scores. Now, for product-based ESG scores, like, for example, our Sustainable Development Goal scores, and how do companies contribute to sustainable development, this is different. In this graph that I'm showing you now, you can see that companies that had a negative contribution to one or more of the SDGs clearly underperformed companies that had a positive contribution by producing products and services that actually help sustainable development. And this is during the crisis. And that is because investors steered away from these more old capital-intensive industries towards technology, towards healthcare, and towards more innovative industries. But the question really is, how much has this got to do with sustainability and how much with the fact that we are just in a deep economic crisis and these companies are just hit harder by that crisis? So I think it's important for us to be clear about the reasons for this outperformance and also to be honest about that. And secondly, it seems like we've been in this crisis for a very long time, but actually we're talking about slightly over 1/4 of performance here. And to me, sustainable investing is all about long-term performance. And we should not get carried away by short-term results. And that is why I think it's very fortunate, and I think we have to give that message very clearly, that we already have a lot of proof that you can invest sustainably and also generate excellent long-term returns. Now, the second point, social issues have become more relevant. Another eye-opener. Yes, social issues are very relevant in this crisis. How to keep people safe, how to keep them at work, and how to hold relationships with suppliers that actually keep people at work that are most vulnerable. But has it become more important than in the past? I think social issues have always been important. but they were probably ignored by many investors. Because climate change and governance are topics that you can very easily relate to financial performance of companies, and that's less so with social issues. In this graph, you can see of a random sample of our investment cases in emerging markets, the most material topics that were mentioned, the most material ESG topics that were mentioned, and the count of that. And we find indeed that the most material issue across sectors is governance. So it's topics like corporate governance, innovation, ESG risk management. However, if you add up, and that's in the blue bars, you can also see the green bars, that's the environmental issues. But if you add up all the red bars, which are social issues like health and safety, human capital management, supply chain management, they are actually equally important when compared to environment. But thinking about how social issues impact companies' business models is probably more difficult. But because it's information that less investors look at, it can actually help you paint a much better picture of a company than if you did not look at these issues. So if you ask me, taking into account how a company treats its stakeholders and encouraging them to do better is simply the right thing to do. And I think this crisis has shown that. And that brings me to my third point. Are management aligned with stakeholders? The past period has all been about capital allocation, about remuneration, and actually quite an unusual voting season. Specifically, the capital allocation debate question has sparked many a debate in our company. The most important conclusion of this debate was that there is no one size fits all. We found it important to publicly support the message of prudent financial management and also ethical financial management, to give companies the room to maneuver and to keep employment. But we also knew that when it came to implementing, we needed to take a case-by-case approach. We actually found that when it comes to all of these issues, including remuneration and access to management, in case of AGMs, companies that we already regarded very highly when it comes to governance actually got it right. And this is not always captured in numbers, for example, of number of independents on the board, diversity on the board, but it often has to do with quality and with leadership. Understanding that in these times, it is wise to reduce bonuses when not only management, but also employees, society, and shareholders are bearing the brunt of the crisis. And that is good to make sure that all investors can voice their concerns, can ask their questions on AGMs, even if we are holding virtual and hybrid AGMs. Now, we have seen big differences in how companies have handled this, and we will remain critical and we will remain engaged. And that brings me to my last point. Fourthly, the silver lining that is often mentioned is that it seems that some sustainable trends have been sped up by this crisis. And it does feel that way. I mean, digitization, flexibility of working, less traveling, less CO2 emissions, deglobalization, they've certainly been boosted. And even the energy transition still seems to be taking place, even though the oil prices reached record lows. In some regions, this is driven by governments. In others, it's more driven by the private sector or by a combination of both. Unfortunately, rising inequality, which was always an issue, is exacerbated by this crisis. And this remains, I think, a very important topic for sustainable investors. And some trends have come, hopefully only temporarily, to a halt. Think about the sharing economy or reducing the use of single-use plastics. And I think both for very obvious reasons. So while we are still in the crisis, but also when we take a long-term view, this does make our work of driving change still extremely relevant, because much has changed, but much has stayed the same. Rebooting the financial system to take a long-term and a broad stakeholder approach, it takes hard work, it takes excellent research, and it takes a lot of cooperation between us all. I hope this innovative RI Digital Fest brings you lots of inspiration to do just that. And I wish you a very nice week, and I hope to be in touch with every one of you. Thanks.
I might just drop in a couple of reflections on the points that you've made. A really good overview of some of the major topics that we're hearing at the moment. And I wondered, on that investment performance question, do you think that one of the significant things that the crisis has done is to debunk the idea that sustainable funds underperform? Because we lived with that for a long time as a reflection that people had, that now we're in this strange situation where people are saying, they're challenging this idea that sustainable funds could outperform in a given period of time, which of course you need to treat with caution, as you do with all investment performance data. But has it kind of changed a sense that we were always living with this problem of critique of underperformance, do you think?
Yeah, I think it has certainly helped. To my mind, I think we had already passed that a little bit in most of the world, where people said, okay, now we can see that actually it can add value, or actually that we can invest sustainably without losing any returns. So I think that was already the case. What probably has changed is that now we can say, it's no longer, let's say, a bull market nicety to have ESG, but it's actually also a bear market necessity, and I think that has probably changed a little bit.
And one of the other things that struck me, you mentioned earlier that you as an investor have been using your corporate governance strategy to accommodate the difficulties that companies have had through the pandemic. Are you seeing that as a general approach by investors? To just give companies a bit more latitude in the way that they manage their staff, for example, and employment during this crisis? Is that something you're seeing more generally?
Well, I think very early on in the crisis, we signed the coronavirus investor response statement that actually explains that, and I think it's now over 370 investors that have actually also signed that. So I hope if you sign something that you really also support it. So I think that is indeed the case. Although we have to not forget that this is a very difficult time for many companies. So yeah, it's balancing. It's a balancing act. But I think more investors are inclined to support companies to take a long-term view. Yeah.
Definitely want to take a look at and sign up if you haven't already as an investor. And maybe just finally, before we end, Masja, I wondered if you had any thoughts on how this whole crisis affects the business of doing asset management. I know it's obviously these are interesting times where you have to rethink what it means to connect with clients and to be thinking about investment. Do you have a sense of the things that may be interesting and may change there?
Yeah. I guess the same with what I explained earlier. A lot has changed, but a lot has stayed the same. So we're still seeing the same long-term trends. Of course, we've had a lot of contact with our clients. I mean, they're going through tough times, we actually have a dedicated part of our website dedicated to this crisis and explain a lot of things, both on, let's say, the financial side, but also on the ESG side. We had already in place the fact that we could work from home, so people were could very easily do that and have contact with clients. And the good thing that we're also seeing is that clients are still very interested in sustainable investing as well. So it seems like they were distracted for quite some time when the market really crashed and we're focusing really on financial issues. And now we're seeing more and more that this interest in sustainability picking up again as well. So a lot has changed, but a lot also still stays the same, and we are still working with our clients to get the best solutions for them.
Great. Masja, thank you very much indeed. It's been a real treat for us to have you here to kick off the Responsible Investor Digital Festival with some particularly challenging thinking, and our aim, of course, is to keep that up during the week. And we're starting to that effect with a rousing keynote interview with Brune Poisson, French Secretary of State for the Ecological and Social Transition, which starts at 10 o'clock in your agendas. So do tune back in and click on the agenda link for that interview with Brune Poisson. On behalf of all of the team at Responsible Investor, we wish you an excellent and enjoyable RI DigiFest. And as ever, even though we are digital and online, if there's anything that we can do to make your experience as enjoyable as possible while you're tuning in from wherever you are at home or in your shed or in the spare room or in the office, do let us know via email, and we will try and do our very best to make this experience as rich and useful as possible. Our thanks again to Masja and to Robeco for their support, and we will see you back online at 10 o'clock for our first keynote interview with Brune Poisson. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good day and enjoy the rest of the week. Look forward to seeing you at the next session. Thank you. Goodbye.